I do want to mention that this presentation seminar is closed to the press. It's also officially off the record, and it's an opportunity for us to learn about what is happening in Israel. Not to decide for Israel what they should do, but to understand what is happening in Israel. So when we approach our members of Congress, we are fully informed of what is happening in Israel. So there is, of course, a wonderful organization called Jerusalem Institute of Strategic Studies. It's one of the foremost think tanks in Israel, regarded by the government and by other institutions in Israel. And it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to have two of their most important people, the president of the Jerusalem Institute of Strategic Studies, Efraim.
For strategy and security.
Security, and yes, sorry. And we'll try to remember it's strategy and security, not strategic studies. So, so we have Professor Efraim Inbar with us, who is the president, and we have Lieutenant Colonel Eran Lerman, who is the vice president. Hopefully I got some of that right. And
he's the full colonel.
I leave it.
A full colonel yet to be determined full of what?
And I leave it to the two of you to make the presentation. I will try to see if I can get that share of the map. I'm not that great technologically, so we'll see if I'm able to bring that up for you. So go ahead.
Good afternoon, shalom from Jerusalem. If we speak about the Israeli plans to extend its law to parts of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, we should first be fully aware that this is not an Israeli initiative. It is an American initiative. It's part of a peace plan presented to Israel and to the Palestinians and put on the agenda of the international community by the current American administration. We should also point out and recognize that this is the best peace plan that was ever offered to Israel. It is, from our perspective, a very good plan because it takes into consideration Israel's national security needs. It also does not demand of Israel to divide Jerusalem, just the opposite. Recognize Jerusalem, united Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and also does not base the peace opportunities on removing either Jews or Palestinians from where they are living. So it is the best plan, and it is actually inconceivable for an Israeli government to say no to such a plan. And moreover, I would like to point out that the president you elected, not us Israelis, is a very narcissistic president who doesn't take lightly saying no to what he wants. He's also in the middle of an election. Now, what we obviously see, and I'm sure you are seeing it also, that the Washington received some cold feet about its own proposals, and we see more conditions coming out. Maybe Trump, for domestic reasons, decided to delay it. I'm not a specialist on Washington. In any case, Israel sees this plan as an opportunity, and if Israel will get the backing of the greatest power in the world, the United States, and this is why I object to calling it a unilateral annexation. Doing it with American backing is not so unilateral. And we'll have to decide what to do. And I think it is important to improve our national security predicament in the future by annexing parts of the Judea and Samaria which are having national security importance, and I'll try to elaborate on that later. Also, such a deed signals determination that we intend to keep it just as we did with Golan Heights, just as we did with Jerusalem. It constitutionally is also more difficult for a future Israeli government to give it up, but this is, of course, Israeli domestic politics. Moreover, I want to point out a myth that, okay, we can keep it and nothing changes. The status quo continues. This is simply not true. The status quo is not frozen. The areas that are candidates for annexation are what's called Area C. And in those areas, despite the fact that the Oslo II Accords of '95 put them under full Israeli control, military as well as civilian, there is an erosion of the status quo by the Palestinian Authority. They are building, they learned from us. They build settlements, they build roads. So the situation is not frozen, and if there will be an annexation, it will be more difficult to erode Israeli control of those areas. I think that therefore it's much better to have permanent control, sovereignty, also to remove those ideas of security arrangements which were raised primarily during the Obama administration that try to substitute for permanent Israeli control of the Jordan Valley. So, which are very problematic, and if you'll ask questions, we'll be glad to answer why it happens. I want also to point out that what Netanyahu suggested, incorporation of the Jordan Valley into Israel, is not a right-wing fantasy. It is basically the implementation of Rabin's strategic vision. And if you take a look to the famous speech by Yitzhak Rabin to the Knesset, when he tried to approve, to get approval of the Knesset for Oslo II Accords in September '95, he delineated quite clearly what the future borders of Israel should be in his opinion. And this includes the Jordan Valley in the largest meaning. It includes, of course, Greater Jerusalem, Ma'ale Adumim. I'm sure you know most of those places. So portraying it as a right-wing whim is simply incorrect. Eran and myself wrote a position paper for the government. It reached the highest echelons of the government, in which we advocated extending the Israeli law according to several criteria. And those are the criteria. First of all, it should be territories that has great national security value. The second criteria, that it should not burden this territory that is to be annexed, is not to burden Israel with a demographic problem, which is a euphemism with little Arabs inside. And the third criteria, which is probably the most important from our point of view, is that this territory, annexing it, is within the Israeli consensus. And we have even defined it in terms of numbers. Around 70% of the Jews in Israel are supporting it. If we take those criteria, basically it converts into the territory of the Jordan Valley and Greater Jerusalem that commands the road number 1, that goes to the Dead Sea and the valley, and is most important junction in Israel, particularly when it comes to the Jordan Valley. Now, Mark, can you show the map or?
I'm trying to see how I'm going to
Okay,
do
if
this.
not, I'll manage. I'm sure you are familiar, you are active, a PAC. You somehow remember the geography of such a small country like Israel. And the Jordan Valley is of great strategic importance because it is the eastern border of Israel. And the eastern border of Israel is the most important one for the Jewish state because it is the closest, closer than the northern border, closer than the southern border, to Israel's heartland. The heartland is the triangle between Haifa, Jerusalem, and Ashdod. This is where 80% of the Israeli infrastructure is, and about 70% of the Israeli population. Now, if you take a look at the maps that we don't see now, Jerusalem is 30 kilometers, or to put it in your numbers, in miles, it is about 19 miles. That's it. The border, the Jordan River to Jerusalem is 19 miles. The whole width of the country is 44 miles. So the road from Jerusalem to the valley is very important because this is the only junction in Israel along the mountains that you can travel freely within an area that has a Jewish majority from the coast where most Jews live, where our military depots are, and if we have to move troops from the coast to the Jordan Valley. This is the importance of Jerusalem. And the Jordan Valley, if we take a look at the Jordan Valley, and you all know, I'm sure you all traveled this road, it's a very steep road going down. So in a short distance, you have a difference of elevation of about 1,200 feet from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. There are very few roads. This Jordan Valley is a desert area, a hilly area. There are only 3 roads from the valley westward to Israel. And if you put a few anti-tank crews and a few military posts, you can stop an armored invasion from the east. And this is the importance of this Jordan Valley, which is not populated by Arabs, or almost not populated by Arabs, because it's desert, basically. The only place where there are more Arabs, it's the Jericho area and Ojja, which is Area A, and we don't advocate changing its status. Area A is area which is fully under Palestinian control. And in the rest of the valley, there are a few hamlets, a few settlements with Arabs that, of course, if it will be incorporated into the state of Israel, the Arabs living there will be given the opportunity, the option to become Israeli citizens, just as we did in East Jerusalem, just as we did on the Golan Heights. So the importance of the valley is overwhelming. And I think there is no real question mark among the military men in Israel about its importance. There are people that say that, okay, we may have some kind of security arrangements. Some people say we shouldn't do it now, we should wait for later. But the importance of the Jordan Valley is not debated, and most Israelis understand it. And we ran a poll at the Institute, knowing the results, actually. I ran polls for over 20 years on those issues. And indeed, 70% of the Jews are in favor of incorporating the valley. By the way, more than the Jews that are supporting the annexation of the Golan Heights. And if we include in the poll the Arab citizens of Israel, which we did, we get still a big majority, over 60%, are favoring incorporating the Jordan Valley. And of course, Jerusalem is accepted even higher numbers than 70% in Israel. Therefore, this peace plan, which it's very good for us, and we cannot say really no. You have an election in November. We don't know what will happen there. I'm not an expert on American elections, but I think that there may still be a chance of seeing Trump there, and I don't think that we should bet on a different administration yet. Maybe at a later stage, it will be a different story. So I will rest my argument now, and I'll turn it over to my colleague that I believe will speak about another aspect that is very important in the Trump plan. Eran, the floor is yours.
I want to focus on one point that keeps coming up. People are saying, including some of my good friends in the Israeli center left, not to mention the hard left, they say this is going to ruin the prospects for peace. And I would argue exactly the opposite. And that's, I think, a point that is poorly understood. The present impasse, the present situation, which I call, which is based on what I call the EKP. That's a short for the everybody knows, quote unquote, paradigm. The assumption by all involved, the Trump, the Obama administration at the highest level, the Europeans, of course, the Arab world speaking collectively, the Palestinian leadership, they all assume that the international community can and should coerce Israel one way or the other into accepting a solution based roughly on the 67 lines with minor swaps, exchanges of territory, a few percentage points here and there, with at least tens of thousands, if not more, Jews violently uprooted, the Jordan Valley under Palestinian sovereignty, Jerusalem divided, and some sort of answer to the Palestinian grievance on the so-called right of return. And this is essentially the paradigm that ran through, I would say, even from the late years of the Bush administration, because unfortunately, Condoleezza Rice, under the impact of the concessions the Olmert government was willing, or Olmert personally, I have to say, because he was not necessarily supported by his government. But what she hears from Olmert and what she thinks herself, and that's already beginning to narrow down to this EKP. You can find its roots also in the Clinton positions in the late stages, the Clinton parameters. And then throughout the years of the Obama administration, this has become a fixation. And ultimately, Secretary Kerry allowed this to take the shape of a UN Security Council resolution 2334, passed in the lame duck period in December 16, which locks the Palestinians even deeper and even more in a more determined fashion into this template, which says this is international legitimacy, this is what Israel must do, and nothing else will constitute a two-state solution. There's only one major problem with this. No Israeli government will, and the Israeli electorate will not knowingly walk into such a trap, because the implications for Israeli security would be extremely severe, because the implications for Israeli society would be basically tearing ourselves apart, because the implications for Jerusalem as the heart of the country, both in terms of security, which Efraim spoke to, and in terms of our identity and our functional living capital being carved into a mosaic of Israeli and Palestinian sovereignties, all of these are fantasies that do not have any political base in Israel. So the Trump plan for all its faults, and it is far from perfect, and we should not treat this as the laws of the Medes and Persians that are immutable. We can negotiate, we can shave off some parts, we can make some concessions, ask for some concessions, but at the end of the day, what the Trump administration does effectively is to break the back of the EKP, take it off the table. This is, by the way, what the Trump transition team tried to do back in December 16. They asked the Egyptians to pull that UN resolution off the table, and Sisi said, okay, he was impressed with the incoming Trump team. He was less impressed by the positions of the Democrats. So he was willing to go, and he had a grudge about the way he was treated by the Obama administration. He was willing to go all the way and take this off the table, and then the Obama administration picks it up via New Zealand and the Malaysians, which basically was throwing Sisi under the bus, saying here's the country like Egypt, and it's less pro-Palestinian than New Zealand. It was a very dangerous thing to do. And the Trump administration was already in transition, in preparation. They asked the Egyptians to kill this, and they tried. So we have to get rid of 2334 in its present interpretation. We have to get rid of this expectation that Israel will deliver on Palestinian visions of the future that would be ruin, it would bring our ruin, and would not be supported by Israeli society. And that's the opportunity to do so. If we are successful in doing this, we can actually, I believe, have a prospect of a proper negotiated outcome which we can live with. But not unless we make good use of the opportunity we have now. To not do so would be to lose what they call in economics the opportunity costs that would go if we don't make use of the opportunity we do have. And the window of opportunity is closing fast, because the closer we are to an American election, the less likely the Israeli government would be to take a step in the midst of American political turmoil. So I think we need to act fast. This is our opinion. At the end of the day, Netanyahu is up there in a very delicate, fragile political situation amidst the corona crisis and so on. We've gone from good to bad again. So I can see why he has other concerns and other timetables, but we, Efraim, myself, our institute, we believe there's an opportunity here that should be taken. And in order for the Trump plan to take hold, to become, as the expression goes, the only game in town, then something must be done. Something practical, something tangible needs to be done to break the present logjam. And this is why we believe that a first step towards implementation of the Trump plan in the context of the Trump plan, not just an isolated act by Israel, but in the clear context that this is leading us towards future implementation and future negotiations over the Trump plan. If we do that, I think we can make good use of this window of opportunity. And as Efraim says, one of the criteria is national cohesion, national unity. And I'll say this, in the very recent past, Israeli politics looked as if they were cleaved right down in the middle. The kind of polarization, terrible polarization that you're seeing also your side of the water. So there was the right and the left, and it narrowed down to being with or against the present prime minister. So even people I know to be very solid nationalist patriots, right, center-right leaders were painted as left because they did not necessarily agree with the Prime Minister's position. So we were drifting into the politics of deep internal division, which is absolutely the wrong thing for us at a time when we are facing huge challenges in our region. The Iranians are now accelerating their nuclear program. If you read the papers, you may gain the impression that Israel is not sitting idly by as this happens. This could lead to greater and greater tensions. And we're also in the midst of a crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean where we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Cypriots against a very ambitious, very aggressive power projection policy of Erdogan in Turkey. And you saw also the re-establishment of the Hagia Sophia as a mosque. This is a very important symbolic act, but it's part of a larger pattern. So when we face challenges on this magnitude, we need to face them together in Israeli society. And going with the Trump plan and going to unilateral first step implementation of the Trump plan can actually bring, I think, the broad center in Israel back into focus. There will be people who will say, no, this is not good, because it doesn't give the Palestinians enough. And there will be Israelis who will say, this is a bad idea because it still gives the Palestinians something. It gives the Palestinians a future prospect for what I would call a state minus, not the two-state solution, the 1.8 state solution. Palestinians we get to keep our sovereignty and our state, and the Palestinians get something which is just short of full sovereignty. So let's call it the 1.8 state solution. But this is too much for the Palestinians in the eyes of people on the right, on the hard right. There are people on the hard left. But there's a broad middle there, and we need it to come together around a unifying concept, and while we face much larger challenges on our other frontiers. So this is, I think, part of the argument we are making. Questions?
So if you'd like to ask a question, I'll ask you to send me a chat and I'll call on you. So if you could just send me a quick message that you want to ask a question. And we'll start off. I have two people already sent in. So Peggy, if you want to unmute your phone and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for your information, your insight, your analysis. I read the article that was out this morning and on the application of sovereignty. My question is that part of this is political and part of this, a bigger part, is public relations. And it concerns me when Israeli authorities, Israeli representatives use the word annexation, because applying sovereignty is the word to use. Annexation is an action that's forcibly acquiring land, and it's usually considered illegal internationally. So by using that word and trying to sell a difficult concept when there's a lot of international pushback, I'm concerned. I think there should be a unified approach in everyone who's in Israel and talking about this to only refer to it as applying sovereignty.
I wish we could have such discipline. I wish we could have such discipline among our troops, so to speak, in the diplomatic field as we do have in the battlefield. People go off in all directions. You know, I've been fighting a losing battle about calling what happened 20 years ago as the second intifada, because in my mind it was never an intifada. It was a war campaign, terror campaign organized by Arafat. It was not an uprising. Intifada is an uprising, literally, in Arabic. Nevertheless, the term stuck. You can even find it in military museum. you have to peel it off the minds of people with a scraper. And annexation is the same story. I mean, people just took it as a shorthand for a more complex, nuanced concept of the application of law to areas which before that were not the sovereign territory of anyone, because Jordan took them by force in 49. Nobody except Britain and Pakistan ever recognized this. Legally, I would say, as Begin used to say, it is a res nullius. It belongs in Latin, it belongs to nothing. It's what we call in the good Jewish tradition, hefker. And so we can make these arguments until we're blue in the face, and then people will still fall into the habits of language. But you're absolutely right. The proper term is the application of Israeli law, which is doable under the existing, I would say, Israeli legislation and governmental regulations. It can be done, and it should be done, and this is the proper name for it. And I would even say, application of Israeli law as a first step to the implementation of the Trump plan. That's the full conceptual framework.
Not with what's going on in the United States. I would just keep it application of law. Period. Once you start that, and then you've got half the country or more than half the country, their hair turns on fire, and whatever you say, they'll hate the idea.
We should not use the word Trump.
Application of law, simple. So I'm just saying that it's a tough idea to sell when you misname it. It's the same as calling, over the years, Israel named the West Bank. It should have been kept. We never should say West Bank, Judea, Samaria. There are many, and when they define the language, when the others define the language, then we lose the case.
Okay,
Well,
next up
it's
is
an uphill struggle, I agree.
Yeah.
next up is Nate Lichtenstein. You want to unmute yourself? Go ahead, Nate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the fascinating and very important presentation. I want to follow up with one comment on what Peggy just said, and then I have a follow-up question. My comment is, I don't think there's anything wrong saying that it's an implementation of the American plan rather than the Trump plan. President Trump is the President of the United States. He presented an approach from, on behalf of the administration. Unfortunately, the president's name is itself polarizing at this point, but I think simply saying accurately that this is the implementation of the American plan is accurate and I think less volatile. The question I have is this. There has been, over the last month or two, a number of newspaper articles suggesting that members of the Trump administration itself have counseled the Israeli government to be a bit cautious in moving forward on the annexation process. What can you tell us about that?
I think it's quite clear that Washington, for unclear reasons to me yet, is not endorsing at this time, July 13, I don't know what will be tomorrow, extending the Israeli law to parts of Judea and Samaria. This is quite clear. We hear every time additional conditions. The main condition was that it should be decided by a national unity government. And from what I understand, there is an understanding in the national unity government that certain areas should be incorporated into the state of Israel. The debate was whether it should be a larger territory, including the Jordan Valley, or only areas around Jerusalem. And I spoke to one of the ministers just last week, and it was quite clear to him that something will be done in that on that issue. Indeed, the main problem now is Washington position. And if we get a nod from the Americans, I think there will be an Israeli move. The extent of territory to be incorporated to Israel is to be negotiated within the government. And I would like to point out that the National Unity Government is probably the best government possible for making such a decision. In order, as I said before, and as Eran emphasized, that national unity is extremely important because peace is not around the corner. And we need Israelis to fight in the next wars that are going to come. Therefore, keeping national unity for any policy is the most important precondition.
If I may add, there are clearly nuances within the American team. People who believe in a more extensive step, and others who are more attentive to the pressures from the Arab side. But there's a point that perhaps we should go back to. Some of the Arab countries are making, let's put it like this, noises. Egypt, Jordan, the French and the Germans joined in a statement calling on Israel not to do it. And they all live of course, in an environment where they are obliged to make such noise. And the question is, does the American administration take these warnings seriously, or does it understand that, for example, a country like Jordan really at the deepest level would rather see Israel stay in the Jordan Valley than risk the kind of scenarios that Efraim mentioned, in which Israel maybe maintains some presence over a short period of time on Palestinian sovereign territory, and then the Palestinians become obnoxious, as they are bound to be, and ultimately we leave and the floodgates open to the destabilization of Jordan, and ultimately even to the destabilization of the Palestinian entity itself. So there's a difference here between listening to what the Arabs say and understanding what they really think or what they really need. And I think these nuances are running through the Israeli establishment, and there's more than one opinion, and they're running through Washington. So we felt obliged at JISS to come out with a very clear, unambiguous position amidst these internal divisions. This is the value of having a think tank that can speak to the issues without, doing the political head counting and so on and so forth.
Actually, the geopolitical situation in the Middle East is very favorable toward an Israeli act to bring in territories that have a strategic value. After all, the main preoccupation of Sunni moderate countries is Iran, its hegemonial advances at a time when the Americans are getting out of the Middle East. We shouldn't forget that the differences between the Obama position and the Trump position on American presence in the Middle East is not that different. So they need us even more. Actually, we are the only ones that are fighting Iranians. So they need us more than ever. I think also they are fearing Turkish encroachment in the region. I'm not sure you are fully aware that the Turks are all over the Middle East with military forces. And they are very concerned. The Arab world is weak, and they need us. And they need us in Washington, they need us in the region. I think the distinctions that Eran made between what they say and what they really think is very important.
Randy Silver, did you have a question? You can unmute yourself. Okay. Jean and Wendy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Jean had the control. The question is, one of our...
We know the husbands are guilty always. So.
one of the presenters made a remark that Israel would need to seek America's permission or, go ahead in order to apply Israeli law to its own settlements. Why do they need American permission? It's Israeli law over Israeli towns.
I don't think we need permission. We need this American backing to do so.
Why?
Don't forget, Israel is a small country, and it has limited leeway. It is dependent upon the United States. We don't want to face the wrath, WRATH of the Americans. So we always took into consideration what the Americans have to say on issues of war and peace. I think there are things that we can do on our own. Jerusalem, for example, was a decision that the Golan Heights was an Israeli independent decision. Now the situation is more complex, and I would hesitate to take such action before the American position is quite clear, particularly when you have an election. So caution dictates Israeli actions, and there are no really fully sovereign states in the world. Let's face it. So there is always some limitation on our sovereign decisions.
Yes, in 1956, when Israel, France, and England invaded and took over the Suez Canal, they didn't ask America's permission. They were forced afterwards to give it up. But they didn't ask permission.
And Eisenhower said, no, go back and do it.
Well, that's exactly the wrong example I would take, because what Eisenhower did to us after that, and wrongfully, because he himself came to regret how he treated us.
Yeah.
But the violence of his reaction meant that Ben-Gurion overnight had to switch from speaking about the third kingdom of Israel to speaking about immediate withdrawal. 56 is not my favorite example, but I would say this. I think we should be able to take our own decisions. We have taken our own decisions on huge matters. In this particular event, the whole beauty of it is that we have an opportunity to take action in the context of an American plan that breaks the pattern that has been set by all the previous administrations. So waiting to see what the administration is comfortable with is a natural choice under these very specific circumstances. Ultimately, we may need to make our own choices, but it is wise to take the opportunity given to us and walk hand in hand with the Trump team or the American team, really. Well, I understand the sensitivity here, but with the American team, as we create facts on the ground that the next American administration will find very difficult to reverse.
Does anybody else have a question? Okay. Richard Benkin, go ahead. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Better?
Yes.
First of all, Efraim, thank you so much for helping me with that information on immigration. Played a big part in my talks in India, so thank you. So here's my question. You are essentially preaching to the choir. There really aren't a whole lot of people you're going to find in rooms like this who are going to oppose extending Israeli sovereignty. And so I think we're pretty much all with you on that. The question is, okay, so what do we do about it? I mean, the fact is, my biggest concern, I know you talk about the window of opportunity, is will we see a sea change against this if Joe Biden is elected? But in other words, what do we, as friends of Israel, do about this?
First of all, I'm not sure that you are correct about that we are preaching to a choir. You know, we, Eran and myself, briefed many Jewish organizations, including the Conference of Presidents, JCPA, and other, and we heard a different tune. And if you read the Jewish press in America, you can definitely see that because this peace plan is associated with President Trump, it evokes many anti-feelings. So this is, I think, a fact. Eran and myself are very sensitive to the need to have an excellent rapport with American Jewry. We don't want to estrange elements in the American Jewry, not only because it's not good for Israel, but also because we believe that we are one people. And we should stay united and try to act together. We have this deep feeling of brotherhood. So for us, it's very important to speak to Jewish audiences, be it in America, we do it with Australians and other countries, in order to make sure that the Jews, if do not support what we are doing, at least they understand the rationale. And this is why we are giving our time, and with, a lot of Zoom meetings, we are doing it all the time because Jews are important to us. And unfortunately, many Jews do not understand what's happening in the Middle East, and we try to educate to the best of our capability.
I'm going to comment quickly. I would just say that I agree with you, Efraim, 100%. And it's very presumptuous to say on a call that you're speaking for everybody else on the call, because that is not the case.
Excuse me, I just want to clarify. I said, I think we're all pretty much with you. I didn't say we are all pretty much with you. If you listen closely, you would have picked that up.
I did listen closely, and it's still inappropriate, and you shouldn't do that.
No,
By the way, I was happy to help him on India. The Institute has Indian program. We are doing a lot of activities with Indian think tanks. And India is, of course, an important rising power, a partner of Israel in military industries. And we are happy to help anybody if needs connections in India. We are at your service.
If I can add a few words on this very important issue, I'm glad to be back in Chicago, if only virtually. I came to know it when I was running the Israel office for American Jewish Committee. Now, if you consider the road that AJC traveled from the days of Proskauer to the days of David Harris, which is, today it's a proper Zionist organization in all but name. I believe that contrary to the image of polarization, I think there's still a bulk of American Jews who want Israel to be, first of all, to be safe and united. And if we can make the argument on that base to American Jews, and they will take it further, I think we can also stabilize and prevent the rot that is coming from the AOC and the Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, and stabilize a degree of bipartisanship. There have been some congressional actions recently in terms of Israeli-American cooperation, which still remain bipartisan. So it is very important for us to be able to make the argument. So the point about security considerations, the point about the avenues that remain open to a future negotiation, which actually will be closed, because if you stick to the Clinton parameters and the EKP, you close the door. If you go with what we are talking about, you actually open it. And the third point, Efraim made it, it's important. We believe we should make the argument clearly that wherever we apply Israeli law, it applies to all the people who live there, Jews and Arabs alike, and that's important for many American Jews. If we can make these 3 points consistently, I think we can at least speak to the center, to the core of historical support for Israel across the American partisan divide. And I cannot hide from you. We're sitting here in Israel, those of us who know America, with our hearts broken and with an extreme worry about this polarization of American life, which makes our life at our end more dangerous and more difficult. So whatever we can do and need to do in order to bridge these differences, we need to do it.
I want to take this opportunity to thank Efraim and Eran for their presentation today. It was enlightening. I also want to let everybody know that I'm going to give, unless you have a reason that you don't want me to, but I will give the email address for everybody on the call to JISS so that they can keep you informed of things that are happening in Israel. You'll be able to get their documents similar to the one that Peggy mentioned earlier today that she read. I also read it this morning. I also want to mention that the main reason for having this presentation was for us to understand what Israel's point of view on this was. I don't know whether it's going to go through or not go through, but if it does go through or it doesn't go through, it is our job to make sure that our congressmen know that we support Israel in their decision that they have made for their own security and interest. And that's what being a friend is, and that's what we do, and we support those candidates and members of Congress who support Israel being a free democratic country that can make their own decisions, and support Israel as a true friend. And in line with that, today we donated to our 50th member of, or not member, either candidate or member of Congress that is running for one of the 470 legislative positions that are being elected this November. That's an impressive record for us, and I'm pretty sure that we are going to continue to do more of that, and that we will have even more candidates that we will find that meet our criteria for considering them to be pro-Israel, and we're going to financially support them. That's our main mission, and I ask anybody on the call who has yet paid their membership or any of the various categories that we have to protect our Heritage PAC, go ahead and go to our website and make their pledge and pay so that we can continue this very vital work. If there's nothing else or anybody doesn't have anything to add, I'll say thank you for everybody. By the way, the interest in this is shown by the fact that this was our largest Zoom seminar that we've had so far this year. And with that, I also mentioned that we have Senator McSally from Arizona, who's running for re-election on a Zoom meeting on Wednesday, and anybody who wants to participate in that should send me an email, and then I will send them the link to join us. But I want to thank everybody for joining us, and of course, special thanks to Eran and Efraim, good friends of our PAC, and we're delighted that we were able to hear them again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mark, if I may, there was a quick question on the chat on the likelihood of a Palestinian uprising. Be of good cheer. The Palestinians cannot presently organize a decent demonstration in Ramallah against the application of Israeli law. So I don't think given their experience in the last 20 years, they're not going to lay down their lives for a leadership they don't believe in. So that's in itself an indicator.
Maybe they're growing up.
They're giving up. Giving up.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Shalom.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Very much. Yeshikoyach. Thank you.